Hi, class. My name is Tyler. I've studied leadership theory throughout my undergrad in communication studies and my master's through the ALICE program. And today I'll be presenting a critical evaluation of Brene Brown's Daring Greatly with respect to the leadership theories that we have learned in class. Daring Greatly is a relatively short read with a variety of interesting stories that all circle back to leadership. There are no internal visuals in the book, but there is a supplemental visual memo that illustrates some of the main points with graphics. Daring Greatly is also available on multiple audiobook platforms. This book has come highly recommended to me by many of my peers and pretty much anyone who is interested in self-improvement and leadership. Brene Brown is a household name in these categories, and I wanted to see what the hype was about. In reading the introduction of the book and the cover, I thought it to be personally intriguing. Vulnerability is not something I have come across often in my leadership studies, so I was excited to learn more. Brene Brown's stated intention is to explore vulnerability and shame, and to offer practices that allow people and leaders to dare greatly, to take interpersonal risks required for creativity and trust. The introduction frames questions about what drives fear of vulnerability, how people protect themselves, and what the cost of disengagement is. Questions that immediately bring to mind some of the concepts in leadership theories that we have learned in class, like authentic leadership and psychodynamic leadership. In Daring Greatly, Brene Brown explores the power of vulnerability as a foundation for courage, connection, and meaningful living. Her central thesis is that vulnerability is often misunderstood as weakness. It is actually the birthplace of innovation, trust, love, and resilience. Brown argues that by embracing vulnerability rather than avoiding it, individuals can cultivate deeper relationships, lead more effectively, and live more authentically. In each chapter, Brown tackles a problem that she has identified in her research and explains how embracing vulnerability can solve it. She does this through personal stories and analysis of qualitative research such as one-on-one interviews and focus groups. In the book, there is an emphasis on the duality between shame and vulnerability. Brown gives us a framework for how shame manifests itself in our lives and how it can get in the way of vulnerability. She defines shame as the intensely painful feeling of experiencing or believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. She explains how shame affects everyone, but not everyone develops tools to deal with shame in a healthy way. She introduces shame resilience as the main support to her thesis on embracing vulnerability. She outlines the way we have developed shame resilience is by recognizing shame and its triggers, practicing critical awareness, reaching out, and speaking shame. Brown delves into holistic applications of shame resilience on parenting, family life, intimacy, personal relationships, the workplace, and leadership. Brown tackles each of these topics throughout the chapters in the book. Chapters discussed include scarcity, debunking the vulnerability myths, understanding and combating shame, the vulnerability armory, and more. Brown differentiates scarcity from modern scarcity. This is not a scarcity of wealth and resources, but a modern belief that we are never enough. How this belief drives fear, comparison, and disconnection, and how vulnerability is a pathway out of scarcity. Daring Greatly presents vulnerability as a powerful untapped force that is within all of us. While it may have been hidden from us through shame, trauma, and power structures, it is possible to reframe our understanding of vulnerability and feel wholehearted in every aspect of our lives. I will critique Daring Greatly in three main sections. I have chosen these sections by my own personal interest and by reviewing class materials. By delving into the arguments made from each author, I will compare Brown's leadership theory to some of the theories we have learned in class. Self-help book or leadership manual. In identifying leaders' social cognitions, integrating the causal reasoning perspective into social cognitive theory, McCormick and Martin Coe expand on Albert Bandura's social learning theory by applying some of the concepts to leadership approaches, specifically leadership self-efficacy. As defined, leadership self-efficacy is one's self-perceived capability to perform the cognitive and behavioral functions necessary to optimize group performance conditions. More generally, it is a person's confidence in his or her ability to monitor and influence the factors that contribute to effective group performance. Through reading this article, you can see a more fleshed out and realized version of the same ideas that Brene Brown presents in Daring Greatly. By using self-efficacy, you can see from a more academic and research-supported perspective that shame affects the way that we lead. While Brown relies on qualitative testimonials, McCormick and Martin Coe use a well-supported previous theory to support their thesis. Daring Greatly versus Psychodynamic Leadership. Brown's research is greatly influenced by previous works and even leadership theories that we have done in class, such as the psychodynamic leadership approach. I would argue that Daring Greatly and psychodynamic leadership are one and the same. Both authors recognize the importance of understanding oneself for self-improvement processes and leadership purposes. They both advocate for understanding the unconscious mind, early childhood experiences, defense mechanisms, and self-awareness as healing. To illustrate my point, I have a quote from Daring Greatly and Penn State's leadership blog. Recognizing shame and understanding its triggers. Shame is biology and biography. We all have it. It lives in our bodies and minds, and it is shaped by our unique experiences and stories. Brene Brown. It is important and prudent for anyone to be aware of what has shaped their personality and emotional responses over time, understand or at least recognize his or her nuances. If we understand some of these things about ourselves, we can recognize when our negative reactions start to emerge and hopefully mitigate them. Penn State blog. The main difference in these similar ideas is that Brown specifically mentions shame, while the Penn State blog is reaching for a more general understanding. I would argue that Brown has a more salient idea here because of the focus on a singular factor rather than a broad definition. This specialization can give us a bigger framework to understand how shame specifically affects leadership. In the article Authentic Leadership Development, Avolio and Gardner highlight the importance of authenticity in leadership. Brown and Avolio and Gardner have very similar stances on the role authenticity plays in the workplace. However, I would argue that Avolio has a better understanding of the practical implications of authenticity. According to Avolio and Gardner, our central premise is that through increased self-awareness, self-regulation, and positive modeling, authentic leaders foster the development of authenticity in followers. Their emphasis on followership is what leads me to believe that they have a better understanding of the practicality behind authentic leadership. While Brown mentions how embracing authenticity can transform your life and those around you, she does not explicitly consider followership from a practical leadership perspective. This lack of consideration suggests that Brown was not as focused on creating positive leadership outcomes, rather, she was focused on self-actualization. From reading this book, you will get a foundational knowledge on vulnerability and shame, but Brene Brown makes these topics easy to understand through personal stories and interesting metaphors. This book has helped me better understand myself, and I think that everyone can benefit from reading it. I would 100% recommend checking out Daring Greatly by Brene Brown.